There's a specific kind of alone you can only be in public. Not at home with the door locked. I mean, the last train, the night bus, the platform at 1 in the morning where the departure board is still working for nobody. The lights are on, the system is running, there are seats for 200 people, and it's just you. And whoever else didn't go home. Welcome back to Vespertine. 3 stories tonight from people who took the last one out. Here we go. I changed carriages 4 times. Every single time he was already sitting in the next one. He never walked past me, he never got up, and there is no way to get between carriages on that line while the train is moving. I've checked. I checked for years. I was 23 and I worked in a restaurant. So I took the last train home basically every night of my life, the 1:40. And I want to say up front that I was not a nervous person about it. I'd done it for 2 years. You get to know the last train. It's the same drunk people, the same cleaner, the same guy asleep at the end. It's boring. That night was a Thursday in October, and the platform was empty, which happened sometimes, but not often. Usually, there were at least a couple of us. The train came in and I got on the 3rd carriage from the front, because that's where I always got on. It lines up with the exit at my stop. And the carriage was empty, except for one man at the far end. He was ordinary. I need to keep saying that in these stories because people always want him to be a monster. He was a man in his 50s, dark coat, sitting up straight with his hands on his knees, facing my direction. Not doing anything. Not looking at his phone, because nobody's phone worked down there. But also not looking at anything else. Just sitting. And I sat down, and I got my headphones out, and I looked up, and he was looking at me. Which, men look at you. I was 23, and I took the last train every night. That was not new information. So I did what you do, which is, I moved. I got up at the next stop and I walked down the platform and I got on the 4th carriage instead. And he was in it. Sitting at the far end, same posture, facing me. Now, I want to be very careful here because this is where people stop believing me, and I understand. There were maybe 8 seconds between me getting off and me getting on. The doors were open the whole time. I would have seen him walk past me on the platform. I was looking at the platform. That's where I was walking. And he was already seated when I stepped in. Already settled. Hands on knees. I told myself I'd made a mistake. I told myself there were 2 men in dark coats, which is not a crazy thing to think. It's a train. People wear coats. So I did it again at the next stop. 2 carriages down this time. Almost ran. He was there. And here's the part that still gets me, physically, when I talk about it. He wasn't at the far end anymore. He was about halfway down the carriage. He'd got closer. And he had never once, in front of me, stood up. I did it a 4th time. And by then, I wasn't thinking, I was just doing it, the way your body does things. And he was 4 seats away, facing me, hands on his knees. And that was when I stopped moving, because I understood that moving was making it worse. So I stood by the doors. I held the pole, and I looked at the door, and I did not look at him, and I counted stops in the reflection of the black window. And there were 5 to go, and each one took about 100 years. The train didn't stop at the next station. It slowed down, and I saw the platform slide past. Empty, lit, the board on, nobody, and then it sped up again. I've since found out that's normal. They skip stations at night sometimes. Nobody told me that when I was 23 at 2 in the morning with a man 4 seats away. I pressed the emergency button. Nothing happened. No voice, no alarm, no announcement. I pressed it again, and I held it in with my thumb for probably 30 seconds, and I looked up the carriage toward the driver's cab. And the door to the cab was open. The little door at the end, that's always shut, was open a few inches. And there was nobody in the seat. I want to be responsible about that, so I'll say it plainly. It was 2 in the morning. I was in a state. I was looking down 100 feet of moving train through a gap in a door. But I have never been able to make myself believe the seat was occupied. The train stopped at my station. The doors opened normally, like nothing. I got out and I ran the length of the platform and up the stairs, and I did not look back until I got to the top. And when I looked back, the train was still sitting there with the doors open, and every carriage was empty. All of them. He wasn't in any of them. But I could see the seat where he'd been, and there was a dip in it. That's what I remember. There was a dip in that seat, like a man had been sitting in it for a long time. I got a taxi home. I got a taxi home for about a year after that, which I could not afford. And I never saw him again. But I also never took the 140 again, so I don't know that that means anything. The line's still running. It's still empty at 140 on a Thursday. The passenger list said 14C was empty. The driver told me 14C had been empty for 6 years. And I sat across the aisle from 14C for 400 miles, looking at a man who never moved. And at the rest stop, everybody got off except him. I took an overnight coach because I was broke. That's the whole reason. 11 hours, leaves at 10 at night, gets in at 9 in the morning, and it costs about a third of the train. I'd booked 14C. I've still got the ticket. That's not a detail I'm adding for the story. I genuinely still have it in a box. So I got on, and I went down the aisle to 14, and there was a man in my seat. And I did what any English person does, which is absolutely nothing. I stood there for a second, and then I just sat down across the aisle in 14D. Because the coach was half empty, and it wasn't worth a conversation at 10 at night. He was maybe 60, gray, tidy, coat buttoned up, looking straight ahead. And I remember thinking he must be tired because he didn't do any of the things people do when they sit down for 11 hours. He didn't take his coat off. He didn't get a book out. He didn't put a bag anywhere. He just sat. 2 hours in, I noticed he hadn't moved, not shifted, not scratched his face, not looked out the window. And I want to be fair, I wasn't staring at him for 2 hours. I noticed the way you notice things. And once I'd noticed, I couldn't unnotice. At about 1 in the morning, I got up to use the toilet, and on the way back, I stopped and had a word with the driver in that little mirror they've got. Halloran, his name was. He'd been driving that route for 19 years, and he had one of those faces that's seen everything. And I said, "Look, this is stupid, but there's a man in my seat, and he hasn't moved in 3 hours, and I'd quite like to sit in my own seat." And Halloran didn't look at me in the mirror. He looked at the road, and he said, "Which seat's yours, love?" And I said, 14C. And he said, 14C's not sold. I said, "It's on my ticket." And he said, "I know, it's not sold. It's never sold. Company's not sold that seat in 6 years." And then he said, "Go back and sit down and don't talk to him." He said that last bit. And then he asked me how far I was going, and we talked about the weather for 2 minutes like nothing had happened. And I went back and I sat in 14D, and I did not talk to him. The rest stop was at about 3. And I want to explain how a coach rest stop works. Everybody gets off. Everybody. The driver makes you because he has to lock up and do his walk round. It's not optional. They turn the lights on and they get you off. Everybody got off, except 14C. And I stood in that car park in the cold with about 15 other people and a vending machine, and I looked back at the coach. And it was dark inside, all the lights off, and I could see the shape of him in the window, still sitting up, still facing forward. And Halloran was doing his walk round with a torch, and he walked all the way round the coach, and he did not look at that window, not once. A man does a thing 19 years, he knows exactly where not to look. We got back on. Nobody said anything about it. Not one of those 15 people said anything, and I've thought about that a lot. Either they didn't see him, or nobody wants to be the one who says it out loud. I looked at the window next to him once, about an hour later, because the sun was starting to come up and there was enough light, and I could see the whole coach reflected in that glass. I could see me. I could see the man in front of me. I could see the seat backs. I couldn't see him. The seat was reflected empty. We got in at 9. Everybody got off. I was last, on purpose, because I had decided I was going to look at that seat. It was empty, and I don't know when it emptied, and Halloran was standing at the door doing his goodbyes like every driver does, and as I got off, he said, and this is verbatim, I have never forgotten it, he said, "Same time next month?" And I said, "No." And he laughed, and he said, "Good." I looked the company up afterwards. They do still run that route. And you cannot book 14C. It's not on the map when you go to pick a seat. The whole row's there, A, B, D, and then nothing. There's just a gap. Somebody made that decision. Somebody at a desk, in an office, 6 years ago, decided to take one seat off a coach and never explain why. I think about that person more than I think about the man. I fell asleep on the night bus 4 stops from my flat, and I woke up 2 hours later and the bus was still going, and the route display was counting down to a stop that does not exist. And I have never been able to find out where I was for those 2 hours. I did shift work and I fell asleep on buses constantly. That's not a scary sentence, that's just my 20s. I could sleep anywhere. My whole life was falling asleep on the N29 and waking up at the right stop by some internal alarm I've since lost. So I got on the last bus at about 12:30, upstairs, back seat, and I was out before we'd left the stand. And I woke up and it was black outside. Not dark, black. And that's the first thing I couldn't explain, because that route goes through the middle of a city. There is not 1 meter of it where there's nothing out the window. There's always a chip shop, a street light, something. And I was looking at black glass with my own face in it. The bus was empty. Not a few people, empty. Upstairs and down, I checked. And it was moving. It was moving at a good speed, smooth, like a road with no junctions. I looked at my phone. 2:28. I'd been asleep for nearly 2 hours on a 40-minute route, so I pressed the bell. And it dinged. Normal ding. The light came on, stopping, exactly like it's supposed to. And the bus didn't stop. I pressed it about 9 more times, which is what you do, isn't it? You press the button that isn't working, like the 11th time will be the one. Then I went downstairs to talk to the driver, and the cab was okay. I've had 20 years to get the words right for this, and I still haven't got them. The seat wasn't empty. There was somebody sitting in it. I could see the shape of a driver, shoulders, arms up on the wheel, the high vis, all of it. But when I got close enough to see the mirror, there wasn't a face in the mirror. There was a head. There was the shape of a head. There just wasn't a face on the front of it. I did not scream. I've thought about why. I think it's because it didn't feel like a threat. It felt like a machine. It felt like something doing a job that had never needed a face to do it. I went back and I tried the doors. Locked, obviously. I tried the emergency window hammer, which is a real thing that is really there behind a little cover, and I hit that glass with everything I had, twice, and it didn't even mark it. And I gave up, which I'm not proud of, but I gave up. And then I sat down and I watched the route display, because the route display was still running. Little orange dot matrix thing at the front, listing the stops. And it was counting down, normally at first. Stops I knew, stops on my route. And then it got to the end of the line, the terminus, which is a bus garage in a place I've been 100 times. And it kept going. There was one more after the terminus. The name wasn't a name. I want to describe it properly, and I can't. It was letters. It was in letters, in that orange dot matrix, and I read it about 400 times over the next 20 minutes, and I could not hold it in my head. Every time I looked away, it was gone. That's the honest report. I'm not being poetic. I'm telling you that my brain would not keep it.
And the bus slowed down for it. It slowed down, and it did the thing buses do, that lean and hiss, and the doors opened. And outside the doors, there was a stop. There was a shelter and a pole and a little timetable in a frame. And it was pitch black past that, and there was nobody on the pavement. And there wasn't a pavement, there was just the stop, sitting in nothing. And I stood at the top of the stairs, and I looked down at that open door for, I don't know, long enough that the doors closed on their own, and the bus pulled away.
I woke up at 6:10 in the morning at a real stop, 3 streets from my flat, with the sun coming up and a cleaner hoovering the floor, and a driver with a face who told me I had to get off because the bus was going out of service. I asked him if he'd been driving all night. He said he'd started at 5. He was completely normal. He was eating a sandwich. My travel card had 2 taps on it, one at 12:30, one at 6:10. 5.5 hours on a 40-minute bus and 1 tap. And people ask me what would have happened if I'd got off. And I want to be honest with you. I don't know, and I don't think about that. That's not what I think about. What I think about is that the bus stopped. It stopped, and it opened the doors, and it waited. It was a service. Somebody put a shelter there, and a timetable, and it runs at night, and it stops when it gets there. Which means it isn't for nobody. That's 3. And if you're listening to this on a night bus right now, and I know some of you are, you tell me in the comments every week. I'm not going to tell you not to fall asleep. I'm going to tell you to look at the route display before you do. If you've got one of these, put it in the comments. I read all of them. Sleep well, if you can.